Okay, you guys, no matter if you're training for something big or you're just trying to get lean and stay healthy, your body requires a lot of protein. In fact, around 1 gram per pound of body weight. Now, cooking whole foods is best, but I'm going to be honest, sometimes I need help hitting my protein count with clean, on the go nutrition that works for both myself and my family. But that is a lot harder than it sounds. I've been searching for months to find a super clean, affordable protein powder that actually tastes good, has a full amino acid profile, and doesn't upset my stomach. Finally, I found Equip Foods Prime Protein. And seriously, you guys, I am hooked. Prime Protein has over 2,000 five-star reviews because there's no junk, fillers, or additives ever. Equip's unflavored grass-fed beef isolate protein powder has only one ingredient. All of their flavors taste amazing. Vanilla happens to be my favorite. They mix well. They can be added to countless low-carb and keto recipes. You can make a quick shake with just 1 scoop and get a 21-gram protein instantly. You guys, that's like eating 4 ounces of steak. Every single batch of Prime Protein is certified non-GMO and is free of glyphosate and heavy metals. If you need a delicious, easy to use, easy to digest, clean protein powder, seriously, you guys need to check out Equip. You can save 15% off with my code DRFIT, DRFIT, at equipfoods.com. And by the way, every single bag comes with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't love it, send it back for a full refund, no questions asked. Welcome to the Fit and Fabulous podcast with Dr. Jaime Seaman. Dr. Jaime, and welcome to the Fit and Fabulous podcast. I am so excited about today's conversation. I know you guys are going to love it. You're going to want to share it with all your family and friends because this is a super hot topic that some doctors don't even know about. So I want to welcome you to the podcast, Dr. Cate Shanahan. She is a Cornell-trained physician scientist whose work have inspired entire movements like bone broth, live culture ferments, and seed oil-free business empires. Together with NBA legend Gary Vitti, she created the LA Lakers Pro Nutrition Program, which has been emulated by elite championship teams around the world. She's so dedicated to her field. She runs a telehealth practice as well as a health education website, drcate.com. She lives with her family on a lake in Florida, which I would like an invite, Dr. Shanahan. That sounds fantastic. Welcome to the Fit and Fabulous podcast.
Thanks, Dr. Jaime. Yes, consider yourself definitely invited.
All right. So we are going to literally dive right in. If you guys don't know Dr. Cate Shanahan, she wrote a book called Deep Nutrition, which I came across years ago when I was diagnosed with prediabetes and trying to figure out why, as a doctor with a background in nutrition, that I was living with metabolic disease. But she has a fantastic new book out called Dark Calories, and I got an advanced author copy before it released this week, and you guys have to go check it out, and we are going to dissect what is in this book today. But Dr. Shanahan, can you just share with people a little bit about your story and what really led to Dark Calories?
Yeah, so I was a very dissatisfied family physician myself in the early 2000s, working in beautiful Kauai, Hawaii, but 30% of my practice felt completely meaningless. It was just like refilling prescriptions for blood pressure medications, managing cholesterol, managing diabetes, managing these risk factors. This was preventative medicine. And what made me feel like, what made me just question it and feel empty was my patients would come in and they would like apologize for things like having high blood pressure. And I'd be like, oh, it's not your fault. And they'd be like, no, doctor, I didn't take my medicines. And I'd ask them why not. And they said, well, they didn't make me feel any better, and I'd have to go through that whole explanation of, well, hypertension, it's a silent killer. It's not going to make you feel better until it's just preventing bad stuff from happening. And that felt empty. That didn't feel true because people would be taking their drugs and still end up in the hospital, right? They'd still get heart attacks, strokes, all the bad things. Their diabetes would get worse and worse, no matter how many drugs. They'd gain weight. It just seemed like I was not helping people out of some sort of morass that they'd fallen into. And I didn't even know where to start. So, where that all changed for me, the pivot point was, I guess like you, I was a collegiate athlete, but I was always plagued with injuries. And then while I was in Hawaii, something worse than ever happened to me, and I developed fevers and joint pains and weird just drive to sleep all the time. And I didn't know what was going on. I made the usual rounds through specialists. I even had surgery. No one could help me. So I was now faced with a roadblock myself. And what ultimately pushed me through was my husband plopped a book on my lap called Spontaneous Healing, because he said I should probably do something about my sugar habit, right? Like he said, I ate like an army of ants, and that couldn't be good, right? And my whole life I'd been a sugar addict, and I didn't even realize, I didn't consider myself that. I just thought I had a sweet tooth and I liked sugar, but I didn't think it was a problem because I wasn't particularly overweight. So by the measures that we learned, I was fine. But that book opened my eyes to the chemistry of fatty acids. And that's where everything really changed for me, because I learned shortly after reading that book that I'd been lied to during my whole medical education about saturated fat and what it does to us. And so that's where I needed to take a deep dive. I was confused, I was lost, but I was hopeful, because I was like, maybe this has something to do with what's missing. And that's where I started writing. I started writing in 2003 or 4, and I didn't get finished until 2009 with Deep Nutrition, because I just kept
Wow.
learning new stuff. And at some point I was like, I just got to stop. I got to stop making this book longer and longer.
Yeah.
It's because there's so much that I didn't learn, that we don't learn as MDs. And in fact, there's so much that's sold to us as gospel truth, but is completely just a bill of goods, unfounded lies.
Yeah, that resonates with me to my core because in my nutrition degree, I mean, I was, sitting with people who would go on to become registered dietitians. And when I left college and went to medical school, I got pregnant with my first daughter. And I vividly remember I was drinking a big glass of orange juice every morning that had plant sterols in it, because it had this big old thing on the front that said it was going to be good for my heart. And, was eating low fat foods because I thought they'd be good for my heart. And I went on to fail my glucose tolerance test. I mean, with my second daughter, my 1 hour glucose test was over 200. And so, it was almost like embarrassing to me years later, looking back and thinking, how could I have gotten the wool pulled over my eyes, so deeply? And so that's what I want to talk about. The very first section of your book is what is the science that medicine overlooks. So I know that there are a lot of medical doctors that would pick up your book and be very wide-eyed with the concepts that are in it. Why it would medicine? Why are we missing this science so badly?
Because it's not taught to us, and we learn the opposite. So we figure case closed. What I'm talking about is, it turns out that we were sold a bill of goods, all of us, all Americans, in the early 1950s. The entire idea of, the root cause of heart disease having anything to do with saturated fat and cholesterol was fabricated, so that, like, that's kind of the long and the short of it. We've all been sold this bill of goods. And so what we're overlooking is the truth, because we're focused on saturated fat and cholesterol. We're absolutely ignoring these industrial oils that now, the collection of 8 of them that I call the hateful 8, they compose 30% of the average American's total calories. And medical science completely skips the impact of these things on our health. It's overlooked it entirely, in spite of the fact that the industry itself hires toxicologists to try to make their products, their oils, as healthy as possible. And the industry itself has said it's impossible to make these things free of toxins because they oxidize so easily. Doctors don't learn, what does that mean? They don't learn those terms. We don't learn very much about the chemical composition of these oils other than that.
Food
Right,
science.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't learn the core science. Like other than we learn that they contain essential fats that our bodies can't make. We learn that our bodies can make saturated fat. And somehow that equals to, therefore, don't eat saturated fat and only eat these oils. But we're overlooking the oxidation, and that's the real problem.
So, when we were taught that cholesterol, saturated fat is the major driver of heart disease and the, most common killer of humans, Americans, who is benefiting from that agenda? I mean, why, people would ask the global question of, why would they lead doctors astray that it's saturated fat and cholesterol when you're saying it's not?
Yeah, so why did it happen? So the reasons then are a little different than the reasons now. So what dark calories, I tell the story of the biggest fraud ever perpetrated on the American public by a medical association. And, that story is truly a scandal. And it's a scandal that has now affected every American because it's changed what every doctor believes about nutrition. It's changed what every one of us eats for the worse. And it happened 70 years ago when the scandalous part of it is that the American Heart Association took money from a company called Procter and Gamble. Procter and Gamble sold vegetable oils like soy and cottonseed oil. And after the American Heart Association took their money, what do you know? Lo and behold, the American Heart Association started promoting vegetable oil as the healthy kind of fat because vegetable oil, they said, could prevent heart attacks. Was there any evidence? No, none. So that's just the beginning of it. So that was an outright lie, but the story gets worse and it gets darker. So I call it dark calories because what they did was spend the next 10, 20 years spending that money to do scare quotes research, which wasn't really research. It was really just propaganda to prop up this claim that vegetable oils were heart healthy and prop up the idea that saturated fat was what was causing heart attacks in the 40s and 50s.
And so what we replace these saturated fats, these are evil, don't eat these are going to make you sick, and insert vegetable oils. So there's this moment in time, you're saying, in the American diet where saturated fats get replaced with these vegetable oils.
Yes. And you know what? Even back then, chemists were warning, this doesn't seem like a good idea because they understood that polyunsaturated fatty acids, which the vegetable oils are rich in, that's why they're fluid and liquid, that they react with oxygen. And they knew that these reactions generated toxins. That was well known. That was already known in the industry. And there were doctors at the time who had this chemistry background that were warning, strange things could happen. It could cause cancer. It could damage our mitochondria. We don't want to start doing this because we have no evidence that these things are even safe, not to mention evidence that they're better than the old standbys, which were, butter, tallow, lard, the old fashioned foods, right? So back then, doctors were making these warnings, but they just consistently got shut out of the conversation. And eventually they died. They died out. And now, the new generation, starting with myself, really, and my father's generation, he was also a doctor, we kind of got so bombarded with the propaganda in magazines in the 60s and 70s that literally said polyunsaturated corn oils were heart healthy. And you wanted to make sure to, there were ads like, your mother or your wife is polyunsaturating grandma because she has high cholesterol. And, you should polyunsaturate your children so their cholesterol doesn't get too high. Like they were literally using the word polyunsaturates in marketing. That's how propagandized it was. People had no clue what polyunsaturates were. They just knew that they and this thing, cholesterol, were stuff to avoid. And you better not use butter, use margarine and use these oils.
But they're using doctors because doctors are a trusted source of information. I mean, I know friends of mine who say, I'm trying to help my dad with his diet, but whatever the doctor says is Bible, you know? And so if the doctor doesn't tell him what I'm telling him, he won't believe it. And so it's just like what they did with cigarettes. My mother was a nurse. She got into healthcare administration, but she tells stories. She worked in the ICU. They used to smoke cigarettes at the nurse's station in the intensive care unit. And she would know when the doctor was coming by for rounds because he would come with his pipe. Now, these days, people would be like, what? Like, we know smoking is so bad, but they literally used doctors and healthcare workers to promote something like smoking, because if the doctor did it, then it was, you know, a good thing. And they did the exact same thing you're saying with vegetable oils and the promotion of them. And I remember my childhood in the 80s. My mom had the spray margarine butter. We used canola oil to cook everything. I mean, my pantry as a child was polyunsaturated fats, and that was in the 80s.
Yeah, mine too. And my dad was a doctor, so as soon as that sort of thing came out, it controlled everything that my mom would buy. She wanted to be the good wife, and feed her children, even though Dr. Spock, which was the pediatrician's kind of like handbook that they would recommend for every wife back then. Dr. Spock was recommending stuff like blending liver and making your own baby food. But because my dad was the man of the house, and his way was the doctor's way. But you said the word, you said it. They're using doctors. And to this day, doctors are not aware that we are essentially useful idiots. We are tools now of the processed food industry. And we don't know this history of the American Heart Association. So I think it's so important for every doctor to understand that the American Heart Association is a corrupt organization. It was founded on industry, vegetable oil industry money. So of course they're going to be promoting polyunsaturates. And when are they ever going to admit they're wrong? Like, they would have to issue the biggest apology ever issued. Oh, we were wrong. We told you to ignore all your culinary history, to throw out the healthy fats and use these factory fats that, oops, looks like they actually cause heart attacks. They cause cancer. They cause dementia. They promote inflammation. So, that's not going to happen. It's a corrupt organization, but this corrupt organization publishes 14 widely respected journals that convince every single doctor that there's so much evidence for their claims. Mm-hmm. And so folks like me and folks like you and folks recommending the keto diet and the other, I guess you'd say, alternative diets, which aren't really, because they're more like ancestral diets, especially when it comes to fat. The folks like us who have kind of gone through this wormhole to the other side and realized that we have been used, when we start talking about it, and the doctors that hear us, they think that we're just looking for attention or we don't understand. Oh, and they, condescend to us, especially the specialists, right? Like the world leading cardiologists, the deans of universities.
Yeah.
So they condescend to us. They think we don't understand, but they're the ones who are, either totally blindsided and just don't know what they don't know. And maybe mixed in a little bit with maybe they don't want to know because they got to where they are with the current paradigm, and changing the current paradigm would undermine their entire careers and undermine their authority.
Well, I mean, you're really taught in medicine to, when I was in residency, it was evidence-based medicine, just stick with evidence-based medicine. And you really, weren't allowed to question, that's what medicine is an art. Like, we're supposed to ask questions like scientists do, but really when you get into, commercialized medicine, you're really not supposed to question anything. If it's in the journal on your desk, then that's what it is. Right. And if it's hard for us to pick through that and understand it, as a patient, as somebody who doesn't have the education, of science and that we do, and physiology and pathophysiology, you're just left to follow, to be a sheep. So break down for us. Can you describe the types of fats? You kind of mentioned saturated fat, polyunsaturated fat. Give us like the kindergarten lesson on these fats so people kind of understand what we're talking about when we talk about vegetable oils.
Yeah, so okay, sure. So well, actually, when we're talking about vegetable oils, there's an easier way to do it, honestly.
Okay.
That I didn't really like grasp when I was writing my first books, but I did it when I was writing Dark Calories. And that is, there's 8 oils that are industrially refined because they are inedible, considered inedible before they are refined. And so I call those the hateful 8. And they are, just listing them out because you have to memorize these. It's not all vegetable oils, right? Because olive oil is healthy, coconut oil is healthy, and what does he want? Avocado oil is healthy. Even sesame seed oil is healthy. But the difference is that these oils have an unrefined like option that's for sale, right? When it comes to olive, we call it virgin olive oil. Virgin means unrefined. Now the hateful 8 are all refined, and I'm going to list them out. And this is all over my book. It's all over my website, so you don't have to memorize it. I just want to give you the idea. So corn, canola, cottonseed, soy, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, and grapeseed. And if you're outside of North America, you don't have canola, you have rapeseed instead. It's the same thing. And often you'll see the term vegetable oil on the ingredients list, but it will say afterwards, 1 or more of the following. And if it contains one of those hateful 8, then you probably shouldn't get it. So, and I say probably because, they're in so many things. They're in spice mixes. Now, if it's in a spice mix, you're getting like a microgram dose. Who cares, right? And I teach people how to identify whether it's in a spice mix or whether it's not. It's a who cares kind of amount. That's very, very important to understand. But so the hateful 8, they are all high in polyunsaturates. And that means that during the extraction as they are made, as the crude oil, as the seeds are converted into oil, these polyunsaturates oxidize and they become toxic. So polyunsaturates just react with oxygen. They have a couple of unsaturated bonds. Those unsaturated bonds are weaker. When you have 2 of them in a row, they actually attract oxygen, and oxygen attacks them and breaks the molecule from being a big molecule that nature made into little shards of molecules that nature doesn't make and that have no use in our body. And many of them are extremely toxic. So I want to talk a little bit about crude versus virgin oil here. The crude oil and the refining of these things, so that all of these hateful 8, they are refined oils, right? Because the crude oil of soy oil or corn oil or canola oil, even if it's organic, even if it says organic, expeller pressed, high oleic, the crude oil of all of these hateful 8 is inedible. I mean, it really is crude. And to make it edible requires such extensive factory refining. It is indistinguishable from the outside to a crude engine oil kind of refining factory. Bless you.
Are you saying it would kill us if we ate it crude or unrefined?
Probably. But here's the thing. I say probably because it's so vile that it would burn your eyes. It would burn your nostrils. If you swallowed, if somebody you wouldn't want to eat it, right? There's no way. But if somebody said you have to eat it at gunpoint, if you swallowed it, would burn your mouth. Your esophagus would feel like it's on fire. Then when it hits your stomach, it would burn your stomach, but also would trigger the vomiting reaction. It's that vile, right? So it probably wouldn't stay down.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's how bad it is. And that's why it needs this extensive refining. And I point this out because a lot of people, we say that, oh, it's because of the refining that makes it toxic. And actually the refining makes it less toxic. Okay.
What do they do? How do they make it less toxic?
So what's in there? It's like waxes and gums and small molecules that are somewhat volatile, and they can they have to do like degumming, dewaxing, washing. They have to remove the solvent with the washing process. Then the deodorizing and debleaching, they absorb with charcoal and special compounds. They absorb some of the toxins.
Wow.
But yeah, so that makes it less toxic, but there's still toxins in there, and it's a significant amount. So, we talk about trans fats being out of the food supply. What's out of the food supply is a subtype of trans fat. Trans fat is an entire category of molecules. The type that is out of the food supply is the hydrogenated trans fat that we made on purpose to harden liquid vegetable oil into a solid shortening. Those are
It's
out of the
what's in
food
the
supply.
middle. It's what's in the middle of the Oreo. That's how I
Yeah,
teach
yeah,
patients.
yes. Now, not anymore. It's all been reformulated because the trans fats that are made on purpose are out of the food supply. But trans fat is a category of molecule, and um, there are still trans fats in the food supply. Some of these are mildly toxic, like the trans fats that were in Oreos, but not anymore. And some of them are extraordinarily toxic, like the kinds of alpha beta unsaturated aldehydes that one of the toxicologists found in French fries, who I spoke to. And he just measured the toxic. He measured these specific compounds in a 5-ounce serving of French fries that he got from a fast food chain, and he found that it contained the equivalent of this carcinogen as smoking a pack of cigarettes.
I read that in your book and was like, wow. So a 5-ounce serving of French fries is the equivalent of smoking 20 to 25 cigarettes.
Yeah, and that's because the oils, that's how do we get there, right? So French fries are way more toxic than the oil as it leaves the factory. So the oil as it leaves the factory is minimally contaminated with some fatty acids that, for the most part, are not highly toxic. When I say minimally contaminated, maybe I misspoke, because it's a percentage basis, so it's a part per hundred. Normally, when we're talking about toxins, we're talking about parts per million or parts per billion. So things like lead and the Roundup and those kind of industrial contaminants, those are present in parts per million, parts per billion. These the bottles leave the factory with abnormal fatty acids present in parts per hundred, much higher percentage. And some of those abnormal fatty acids are those alpha beta unsaturated aldehydes that are extraordinarily toxic. At concentrations of parts per million, they have toxicity. And in some bottles, there's already parts per million. But we get more and more and more of them because these oils, these polyunsaturates in the oils, continue to oxidize. It's like the little bit of contaminant in there acts as a catalyst, accelerates the reaction. So when you heat it, even when you just expose it to light, when you cook with it, you create more toxicity. And the worst
Wow.
of the worst is the deep fryer, right? That's why French fries are kind of, they're toxic little bombs. One
Mhm.
French fry equals smoking one cigarette, right? So if you eat fries or tater tots or onion rings or
Chicken
anything deep
strips, all
fried,
the things.
yeah, you are essentially a smoker. I mean, I hate to say this, but if you're giving your child these things, you've given your child the toxicity as if you taught him to smoke, right? And,
Wow.
obviously it's not your fault. You didn't know this. Doctors didn't tell you. They should. But that's the reality. That's the toxicological testing shows this.
Wow, that's terrifying. Okay, so I think, people listening are like, okay, yeah, I've heard like fried foods, aren't healthy. But can you give people examples of, I mean, these things are pervasive in the grocery store, but um, tell people, like, what are the most common things that are in people's pantries right now that have these hateful eight in them that they would not guess?
Yeah, so things like salad dressing, you think a salad is healthy. Mayonnaise, the most popular condiment in the United States, is almost always made with soy oil or canola, one of the hateful eight oils. The vegetable condiments, that you wouldn't necessarily even look at the ingredients, like sun-dried tomatoes, sometimes olives, canned fish, really anything that is a canned food, like refried beans, pretty much anything that is a prepared dinner. A lot of the seemingly healthy things like lean cuisine or Marie Callender's, your child's probably favorite chicken strips, like I said, tater tots. And the other thing that kind of breaks my heart to see this is, how many moms have you seen carrying around those little bags of goldfish to feed to their kids for snacks? Those goldfish crackers, Cheez-Its, Triscuits, any kind of cracker, saltines. People think of crackers as kind of being healthy because they're kind of mild and bland tasting. They are absolutely not healthy. You name it, 80% when we're talking about shopping in a grocery store, 80% of the products you buy that have a ingredients list will contain one or more of these oils. And so that's how we get to this point where 30% of the average person's daily calories are coming from the collection of these 8 oils.
It's so scary. It's literally, I mean, when you think about what kids are eating, I mean, adults are eating it too, but every kid's snack is full of these oils. And I think, when kids are little, I mean, we definitely are seeing rising rates of childhood obesity, diabetes amongst children, these metabolic diseases, but kids also have like a level of resilience. And that's how I was. I mean, I grew up eating all of these oils, but it didn't really catch up to me until I was in my 20s and I went to get pregnant, and then, ended up with hypothyroidism and diabetes. And it's just absolutely terrifying because it doesn't happen instantaneously, right? It's over time. Tell people these particular fatty acids, how long they live in your body and in your tissue, and when you're trying to get them out of your body, how long it takes, because I think that's kind of a staggering statistic.
Yeah, so what they do is they build up in our body fat, right? So the polyunsaturates are unlike other toxins that we consume. The phthalates and the water bottles and other toxins, our liver and our kidneys have the enzymes and have the capacity to eliminate them from our body. But fatty acids, these polyunsaturated fatty acids, they are actually, also, they double as nutrients. It's just that we're way overdosing. And this overdose of polyunsaturates has reformulated human body fat. Human body fat is supposed to contain maybe 5% polyunsaturates. And now, depending on your diet, it's probably at least 15%. And some people, it's 40%.
Wow.
Babies who are formula fed, or the only oil in there is one of the hateful 8, have 40% of these. 40% of their body fat is this stuff. This has never before happened in human history, folks. This is an experiment on the human race. It's like I say, it's reformulated our body fat. Our children's body fat now is radically different than it was even just 20 years ago. When you and I were kids, and you're definitely probably younger than me because I grew up in the 70s. So when I was a child, the oils probably were like less than half of what they are today, maybe probably more like a third of what they are today. And so that means that my body fat would have maybe somewhere like 10 to 15% polyunsaturates. But now, like I say, it's significantly higher. And this is why we are seeing type 2 diabetes in 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. And we did not before. And, a lot of folks are focusing on the carbs. I myself thought like sugar was the reason I was unhealthy, once I first started learning all about this. And I didn't really know, but I knew vegetable oils were unhealthy too, but I was a little confused about which was worse. But this reformulation of our body fat profoundly changes our metabolism. And that means that, what does that mean? What is it doing to us? Well, it's causing insulin resistance. And I know a lot of folks have never heard that before because I'm the only one saying it right now. I don't think that carbohydrates are driving insulin resistance the way that we've heard, as if they're the sole driver. I think that it's, they do play a role, but I think it's minor now. Now that I've studied it more, I've found just like this, carbohydrates
But
don't reformulate our body fat.
well, it's because the carbs that people are eating are also co-packaged with seed oils. I mean, right? I mean, think of most,
Right.
I tell
When
patients,
you mean like when you cut out carbs, you're also cutting out the seed
like
oils, right?
you didn't get diabetes from blueberries and carrots and rice. Like you got diabetes because you're eating like chips and french fries and cookies and crackers, right? They contain carbs, but they also contain the bad fats. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
this like perfect atomic bomb of inflammation. So can you make the connection for us? How does seed oils, polyunsaturated fatty acids in the diet cause metabolic disease like insulin resistance, diabetes?
Yeah, this is kind of a going to be a put your thinking caps on kind of next few minutes here, because it wasn't easy for me to figure this out. And it has to do with the fact that with two things: our body fat is reformulated, so it contains polyunsaturates. So what does that do? Well, I had to ask that question myself, and it took me several years to find that, we have to burn our body fat to get rid of it, right? As you asked about how long does it take to detoxify? Well, it's the same as how long is it going to take to get your weight back to normal, and maybe and then some after that, because we have to basically burn all of it off, right? There's no other way to get rid of it. We cannot detoxify it. And one of the toxicologists who I spoke to compared the polyunsaturates accumulation in body fat, the behavior she felt it had, like it was like a toxin. She compared it to a toxin because our bodies, because it does bioaccumulate, not just in our subcutaneous fat, in our visceral fat, and around all of our organs, around our arteries, causing inflammation in our arteries. So it has this toxic effect throughout our entire body. And what does it do to our mitochondria? That was the key question I had to ask to really unravel the connection with obesity and diabetes and insulin resistance. And I was searching for the answer to that for years before I finally found the right search term to use. And I found this article published in 2002 in Italy, where they tested using the right kind of cell assay, and tested mitochondrial function against 4 different fuels. One was saturated, one was monounsaturated, like what's in olive oil. One was an omega-3 fat, like the linoleic acid in soy oil. And one was an omega-3 fat, like the omega-3 that's also in most of the seed oils, but especially in canola oil. And they showed that within minutes, the 2 polyunsaturates started shutting down mitochondrial energy production, and the cell started shooting out free radicals that were going to promote oxidative stress and harm the cell.
Wow.
And so how does that end up as diabetes, right? Like
Yeah.
that seems bad, but like, how do you get to diabetes from that? That was another thing that took me a long time to figure out. So I had to think, like, first of all, there was evidence that this did take place. There's animal study evidence that you can feed animals soy oil and a very low carb diet, and they will develop type 2 diabetes. So there was reason to pursue this question of what's going on. How exactly does this happen? Now, the toxicologists who do those sorts of studies, they say, well, messing up your mitochondria just, confuses your whole energy brain. That was the term that Francis Sladek used. Your whole energy brain is off, and so nothing works right. But what I thought through the process a little bit more in depth and found some more studies, I found that feeding people polyunsaturates versus olive oil, you wake them up in the morning and you do their fasting blood sugar. On the polyunsaturates, their fasting blood sugar is lower. What was going on there? Well, that's the key. What was going on is their poor cells were not getting energy from that fat. So they had to use an alternative fuel. What's that? Sugar. Mm-hmm. So they were slurping more. Their cells were using up more blood sugar, and that's dropping blood sugar. And then I had a huge light bulb moment, because I realized my patients were always telling me how they were feeling like they needed to snack between meals.
Hangry.
That's driven by falling blood sugar, falling brain energy. And how much are we talking about brain energy now driving metabolic disease,
Yeah.
driving all sorts of psychiatric conditions, right? So we know that energy metabolism is profoundly disrupted now in our entire population.
Mm.
And I think, blaming sugar for it all is maybe part of the story, but
A
largely it's not the whole
piece of the puzzle,
story.
but yeah, there's definitely other
Yeah,
puzzle pieces. Yeah.
exactly. And I think that this is important because what what it means is that people are metabolically addicted to sugar. So it's not just
Hmm.
the taste that they're craving; it's affected their appetite. Like their appetites are now energy in the brain equates to sugar rather than fat.
Hmm.
Leptin doesn't work anymore. Our
Right.
normal satiety signals don't work anymore. Now, the only thing that is driving appetites when you have insulin resistance, when you have all these PUFAs in your body fat, is this incessant need for blood sugar.
Yeah, yeah, it totally makes sense to me. So, I think when people are listening, they're hearing, okay, well, diabetes, or like, I'm not obese, I don't have diabetes, but there's a really interesting page in your book that talks about other common inflammatory diseases that could be caused by, or could be improved by cutting out vegetable oils. And you guys were talking allergies and asthma, skin conditions, like hidradenitis. That's something I take care of in my clinic. Brain inflammation, depression, anxiety, um, PCOS, celiac disease, Crohn's disease, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, even just chronic fatigue, susceptibility to COVID. I mean, there's a really, really, robust list in here. And, inflammation is such like a generic term, but most of these things, if you can lower inflammation, they get better. So then, what's driving the inflammation? So I hope the people listening are kind of, putting the connections and the invisible strings together as to how one thing leads to the next. So, okay, so we've convinced people, Dr. Shanahan, that vegetable oils are horrible and they're all going to go to their pantries and start cleaning them out. So I want to talk about, be solution driven in this. Where do people start when they need to get rid of the hateful eight? And in your book, you call them the delightful dozen. What do you take? You take something out, you replace it with something. Where do people even start with getting these things out of their diet?
Well, the first really simple thing is memorizing the list of the Hateful Eight and then turning every package around to read the ingredients and scan for one of the Hateful Eight. I like to say, if you can turn the package around, you can turn your metabolism around. You got to know what you're eating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like that's the first like simple habit, right? That's not so hard. Just look, find out what you've been eating. Now you can do that in your kitchen, and I walk you through the process. Actually, I walk you through a kitchen detox, like how to systematically replace everything, right? Because you can't just not eat anything. You have to know what to eat instead. And so I do teach you about the fats that you want to go after, and I call them the delightful dozen. And just to give you a few examples, like my favorites are butter, olive oil, peanut oil, sesame oil, and coconut oil. I pretty much always have those in my house. Often I use bacon grease. I don't personally use a lot of lard or tallow, but I want people to know that it's healthy if it's available to you. And some of the more expensive nut oils like avocado oils is actually on the good list too. I just don't personally like the flavor. And then like macadamia nut or almond oil, those are specialty oils that are all really good for you, but they all have to be virgin. They all have to be unrefined, right? So refined peanut oil, I don't recommend.
How would somebody know? Does it say refine? How does somebody know if they pick up peanut oil if it's refined or unrefined?
Two ways. One is it should say. The other way is it should really have a strong peanutty flavor and taste.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Um, so people are reading the book. They're like, oh my gosh, bacon fat, tallow, lard, chicken fat, butter. Like, are you sure, Dr. Cate, this isn't going to clog my arteries?
Yeah, and this is why I have an entire chapter on what you haven't heard, the truth about
Hmm.
cholesterol.
Yeah. Yeah.
because
That probably would deserve its whole entire own podcast breaking down cholesterol. But I love how in the book you talk about cholesterol as a nutrient. Everybody thinks of it as this like toxic, horrible thing that cholesterol is.
right, like, yeah, I mean, I had to start being proactive about cholesterol because patients would be like, yeah, but my LDL is higher. Yeah, but my total cholesterol is higher. And when I just say, yeah, no, it's not, it's okay because that doesn't cause heart attacks. It's oxidative stress from these polyunsaturates and smoking and other risk factors. So that like didn't like really resonate. It wasn't until I realized, you know what, that would be like if I said, you know, it's smoking isn't that bad, because we're also brainwashed. I have to turn it around. I have to turn the tables on this conversation and say cholesterol is actually a nutrient and your body's depleted of it. You need it. You need it for your cell membrane structure to function. That is this is very interesting little biological, how biology is so logical. So cholesterol is the backbone for our fertility hormones, right? Our sex
Yeah.
hormones, estrogen and testosterone.
All of them.
What is fertility but division, really? It's like we're dividing, right? We're dividing into two. So that is also the amount of cholesterol in a cell, in a petri dish, is the deciding factor for whether or not that cell, when we're talking about cells that are capable of this sort of division, that's cholesterol is the sensor. When there's enough cholesterol, the cell can divide. When there's not enough cholesterol, the cell cannot divide. Isn't that interesting? Like it's going back to like the single cell organism. This is going back billions of years of biology, that cholesterol is that fundamentally important to life. And we as doctors have been assaulting people's cholesterol, their cholesterol content of their bodies. We've been assaulting their cells by depleting their bodies of the necessary ingredients to make enough cholesterol. And the average cholesterol has dropped in the population. It's dropped by like 20 or 30 points over the past 40 years since
Yeah, we've become obsessed
thing.
with driving it lower and lower and lower, and lower is better, and people are still having heart disease.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about unmedicated people.
Yeah.
So it's because these oils were supposedly healthy, remember, because they lower cholesterol. And they do. And now that we're eating more, our cholesterol is more depleted.
It's terrifying. It's terrifying. Okay, there was one other thing that I thought was like, whoa, as I was reading your book. Like, so people are going to they're going to go to their pantries, they're going to cut out the vegetable oils, they're going to get the canola oil out of their foods, they're going to be reading the labels. Let's talk about protein for a minute. You talked about protein powders as a processed food, and I was like, oh, wow, I've never even thought about it like this. Can you talk to people about, structuring a diet as far as, you've kind of said carbs maybe aren't the villain. Talk about protein for a minute when it comes to inflammation and metabolic disease.
So protein is the building block of enzymes. And some of the most important enzymes in our body are antioxidant enzymes that fight oxidation and oxidative stress. And you and I didn't talk about this, Dr. Jaime, but in the book, I describe oxidative stress as the root cause of all of those inflammatory disease and also the degenerative disease. It's the root cause of death and dying at that cellular level where everything begins. And so we need enough protein to fight oxidative stress. And one of the other nutritional issues leading to insulin resistance is protein deficiency. There's a type 2 diabetes that occurs in people who have low protein intakes. That's because you need protein to make all those oxidation fighting enzymes, and oxidative stress gets out of control when you don't have enough protein. So how much protein do you need? Well, actually, I have a little graph in the back that based on your age and your sex and your height, it tells you exactly like what is the range that I think is ideal for health. And it should come from real foods, not from protein powders.
Right there.
Yes, that is exactly it. Yes. And I also have like a little in the appendix, I have like an easy way to estimate how much protein you're getting from real foods, right? But I don't recommend the whey protein powders. I don't recommend the pea protein powders. And I recommend looking on labels for hydrolyzed vegetable protein, like a lot of protein bars that people think are healthy, even the keto protein bars that might have a decent fat in them, will contain processed proteins, which also promote oxidative stress, and you want to avoid them as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we've become a society of convenience and protein bars, protein shakes, I mean, everything that you can just grasp and on the go and quick. And we're getting away from eating real foods, chicken, beef, fish, salmon. You know, I have a list that I give my patients and they're like, well, how am I gonna do this? And I'm like, you've never had to do it before, right? You have to prepare, you have to buy these things, you have to have them prepped. So give people an idea of what's your day-to-day life like? Like, how do you, we've made it so difficult for people to be healthy. Give people some tips and tricks of things you eat at your house. And then also, how do you eat on the go and eat at restaurants?
Yeah, so I have all those solutions. Actually, they're in the book for folks, what they can do. What I do is like ridiculously easy and simple. I mean, I don't even eat lunch, right? And I don't feel bad if I don't eat lunch. I can go for a super long time without eating and even not get hungry because I'm no longer insulin resistant. I don't have that PUFA in my body fat anymore. I don't have an inordinate amount of oxidative stress. So my life is really easy now. I just have like milk and cream and coffee for breakfast. That's all I've had all day. That's all I'm going to have till dinner. And then I make some sort of a dinner, like usually I don't do like stews. I do stuff that you can do in like 15 minutes, usually 15 to maybe on the long side. Yesterday, I made something that took a half an hour. So, and I have recipes in there for some of the types of dinners that I make. But I think what's more empowering and what people really struggle with more is this on the go question. How can I avoid, needing one of those fast food solutions that I know is going to be saturated with nasty oils? And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I have in the book. I have like ridiculously simple meal solutions, like, put peanut butter on celery and have it with a glass of milk. Or bring some, make a sandwich with the type of bread that I recommend, which is sprouted grain bread, which does not bump most people's blood sugar levels at all. When you do CGMs, you can see what's going on with yourself if you're
Mm-hmm.
worried about it. But so if you just make a sandwich with like healthy nitrate free sandwich meat, any kind of cheese you want. If you want to do mayo, just make sure it's a seed oil free mayo. But you can do mustard. You can do any kind of sauce that you like. You could do, I have so many ideas in the book of just how
Mm-hmm.
to throw a breakfast and lunch together without any cooking. So who wants to cook 3 meals a day? That's insane. So I don't. I consider it a good day if I've used one pan to make all the things
Yeah.
that I'm going to need. That's my
Yeah, no,
goal in
the back of this book is gold, you guys. You have to take a look at it. There's just idea after idea. And she even has a script in here on how to talk to your waiter or waitress or hostess at the restaurant about the oils that they're going to use to cook your food and how to ask to, maybe to use butter or some other alternative oil. It's it's she literally everything is in here that you need to be successful, but people aren't, this is not what, they're not thinking about it, or maybe they think
life.
they're being rude if they ask, or but at the end of the day, it's your health and you have to live with the consequences of all those choices.
Yeah, and I think of it as almost like you're starting a movement. You're actually educating the server that there are people that care about these oils too. Like everyone's all heard about the gluten and the low carb movement, and there's also the vegan on the other side of things. People have heard about all that. People they know about peanut allergies now, but they've not heard about this. And I think this is the number one most important thing to be paying attention to. And right now, we have nearly 100% saturation of bad oils in restaurants. The more people start educating their servers and the more like restaurants get the sense that people actually care. Just imagine if we had a world where even just 10% of your restaurant options on the go were not going to make you sicker. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a small ask. Let's 10% of the restaurants don't poison us when we plop down our cash, right? I think that would be great.
Yeah. As far as, fried foods, are there alternatives for some of these restaurants, that they could be using in place of these seed oils? Is it a profit margin issue? Why would they not make the switch?
So they would have to switch to tallow, and that's an entirely different process. One chef actually told me you need a different type of deep fryer.
Mm.
And this is for the deep fryer. So primarily, restaurants are doing as much deep frying as they possibly can because it is a set it and forget it. You don't need any kind of culinary skill. You just plop something in, heat it up. And most restaurants are getting their food already pre-cooked and saturated with oils from, just the food chain is entirely built around these things. And so we're talking about, you know, a structural problem for anything but like the mom and pop restaurants. All of your chain restaurants, they source their stuff is pre-cooked, pre-prepared. Their sauces all contain their aiolis. They've got butter oil. Everything that could have fat in it is going to have an unhealthy fat if there's, unless it's like actually the fats in fish, or in the meat or something like that.
Right.
So tiny minor components of actual fat. But this is something I learned in going through the process of trying to understand how did we get to this 80% of our fat calories. Well, every possible substitution has been made because it's so cheap and it's so nobody's allergic to it, right? You can't use peanut oil. No one has an issue with they're vegan compatible. They don't contain, no worries about like gluten or cholesterol, stuff like that, all the common things. Also, they have a high smoke point. That's another like selling feature that is not meaningful for health in any way, shape, or form. But we are all trained to believe, like we've been brainwashed about cholesterol. We've been also brainwashed about smoke point making any meaningful difference to our food. And so, it's a systemic problem. And so you have to be prepared. The whole world is trying to feed you these oils. And so there are ways around it, but you have to be prepared. And the best bet is really becoming more food self-sufficient and just getting permission to make some of these fast, easy meals that I use myself that are healthy. Like one of the things I do is I'll get a corn tortilla, those yellow corn tortillas.
Yeah.
Made out of corn masa, which has a lower glycemic index than flour tortillas. There's no fat in it, so that we don't have to worry about the hateful eight. And I throw some cheese on it, stick it in the microwave for 30 seconds, melt the cheese. It's bubbly and sizzling and delicious. Pour some salsa on that, and that would be like a lunch or a side dish, or it's so good. I use it for dessert sometimes.
Wow. Yeah. So easy. So I had a patient tell me there's actually an app now. You have to pay for it, but it is a registry of restaurants and places that don't use these hateful eight. And so when you're on the go, you can find places in your community, or if you're traveling, you can find places. And so it was very interesting to look at my city and places that were on there. I hope that, this grabs on as a grassroots movement, Cate, and that more people will open their eyes to, what's happening. So you guys really have to go check out Dark Calories. It's out now. Dr. Cate, tell people where they can find this, where they can find your work, how they can follow you on social media.
Please visit my website, which is drcate.com, drcate.com, and sign up to my newsletter so that you're notified when I have like new projects or resources to make life easier, to make becoming healthier less of a hassle. Scroll down to the bottom and sign up for my newsletter. It's once a month. And then Amazing. If you want to follow me on social media to stay up to the minute, up to date, it's at Dr. Cate Shanahan, DRCATE Shanahan, on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
So fantastic. Well, thank you guys for listening. Please share this, comment, write your questions, like and subscribe. We depend on all of you to spread these messages around the world. Did you guys love that last episode of the Fit and Fabulous podcast? Well, of course you did. And I want to keep bringing you the most amazing content from the most incredible people. And you can help me by subscribing to the Dr. Fit and Fabulous channel. You guys know where the button is. Just click it. It's the doctor's orders.